Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
What you holding up? Oh, look, it's the year it's the digits 1968. You must be referring to that year.
Yes,
which I remember fondly.
Fondly?
Richard Nixon was elected.
Well, it's a year when everything went crazy. And my original scheme for opening the show was I was going to be like vacationing because it was a slow news week. And then all of a sudden this shit started happening. And I realized it's not a slow news week. And people feel the society is veering out of control. And
wait, which shit are you talking about? There's been a lot of
Abe
shit.
being killed.
Oh, well,
be
that's
one
halfway
thing.
Around the world. There's
And
Boris Johnson.
Well, but that's not a...
There's the 4th of July shooting here in America, which happened since we last spoke.
Right.
But you're right. There's a lot of shit.
July 6th, there's... For a vacation week, there's a lot of shit. And although the economic news wasn't that bad. Every time that happens, I think of 1968 and what a horrible year it was. Kennedy was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. There were riots. There was the Vietnam War. Nixon was elected. There was the siege of Chicago. It was a huge disaster, and we made it through that. And if you can make it through that, you can make it through anything.
And you know, one good thing that happened either late 67 or 68, I think it was 68, that if it happened again, might help us get through this. An incumbent president decided that it would not be in the best interest of the nation for him to seek re-election.
Well, I'm much less worried about, maybe it's because I'm not very sympathetic to Biden, but I'm much less worried about the problem of getting rid of Biden than getting rid of Trump.
Well, they're related. They're related. Biden is of all the candidates who could run, I think he's least likely to get rid of Trump, with a possible exception of Kamala Harris. The way things are going,
if Trump runs, he beats every Democrat. So Trump is the key.
I don't know about that.
Name a Democrat.
I think that's not true. I think that's so not true. I think that's so not true. I think you need, okay, so let's accept your premise. You know, everything's terrible in November. Inflation's bad. You know, pandemic, still a pain in the ass and so on. Fine. But there's a big difference between having Biden, the incumbent president, who's naturally, rightly or wrongly, held responsible for that, or almost equivalently having Kamala Harris, who's in the White House with him. Big difference between those things and having some Democrat much less closely associated with the policies than somebody in the White House, and who just inherently does better against Trump. And almost every Democrat does better against Trump than either Biden or Kamala Harris.
Not that much better.
Trust me. Trust me.
I just spouting the conventional wisdom, which is the Democratic bench is incredibly weak, except for Michelle if she runs.
Again, I mean, a number of nondescript, more or less nondescript people. Chris Murphy. I think Cory Booker would have a way better chance than either Kamala or Biden.
Apparently, if you read Dale Russakoff's book on Mark Zuckerberg giving Cory Booker a lot of money to rebuild the newer schools, Cory Booker comes off awfully.
How many Americans have read that book?
Well, the point is, do we want Cory Booker as president? Not
again, compared to Trump, yes.
They'll read it if he runs for president. We'll know about it.
Compared to Trump, we want Boris Johnson. Yeah. Is he available? No, he wasn't born here. I just want to finish this thought. Just imagine Trump on the debate stage. Okay, 4 years older than last time. At least as obnoxious with all this January 6th shit out there. I think a lot of voters would rather not have to vote for him. And you just need to show them someone who clearly is less crazy, younger, more vigorous. They seem sober. They don't push any of the hot buttons that drive, swing voters crazy, and they kick his ass. I'm telling you.
So you want Matt Iglesias to run?
I'm pro Matt. Yeah. I mean, I think I'd have a shot at a cabinet in an Iglesias administration.
I have an anti-Matt point, which I'll make later. But the first, the idea that Jason Furman, an economist I respect, thinks that the underlying inflation rate is 3.5%. There are already signs that inflation is diminishing a bit. The job market is strong. It's not at all clear we'll be in a bad economic situation when the presidential race comes around in 2024. In fact, I think the Democrats might stage a comeback in time for the midterms. Here's the argument. Inflation is abating. Furman says it's 3.5%.
By the midterms?
Yes. You're forgetting the Filer faster principle, Bob, which is
everything happens
faster. In fact, anyway, Jason Furman says the inflation rate is underlying core rate is about 3.5%. That's what we'll settle into. And if the Fed wants to bring it down to 2%, if they're really intent on doing that, then they might plunge the country into a recession. The other thing that might plunge the country into recession is the Filer faster principle itself, which is the Fed may not realize that it's we're going to stop inflation message was processed by the economy much faster than it used to be. So various prices are already going down and people are already anticipating a recession. And it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy if the Fed actually follows through with these big rate hikes. So that's another thing, but it certainly is possible that inflation will be on the way out by November. And the Republicans, let me finish my thought, the Republicans are waging their whole campaign on inflation. The polls show that consumers care more about inflation than January 6th. Well, they do until inflation stops. Then they'll stop caring about inflation. They'll look at the Republicans and see, what is your affirmative message? And they'll look at Kevin McCarthy and see a blank slate, a hole in the universe. And
that's kind of harsh. That's kind of harsh. He's a hole in the entire universe.
Well, okay. I'm reacting against Mark Leibovich's piece in The Atlantic, which was based on the premise that he's bored with Trump. The interesting man is Kevin McCarthy. That's absurd. No, the interesting man is Kevin McCarthy is not an interesting man. Anyway, the point is the Republicans have nothing but inflation. If they were talking about the border, if they were talking about, wokeness, if they were talking about other things.
They'll talk about wokeness. They'll talk about that throughout
They always talk about them when necessary, because that's what wins them elections. But, they should be talking about it now and highlighting the massive influx across the border.
First of all, this is you being paranoid. This is you not wanting the Democrats to win and looking for these, weird triple bank shot ways they could win. Suddenly inflation could disappear. By the way, today, the stock market doesn't share your view because it, I think, reacted adversely to the good job numbers, thinking that they signal that inflation is going to be harder to tame. Leaving that aside.
No, they think the Fed's going to raise the rates.
Well, because
it's a different thing.
Yeah, but they know that the Fed is monitoring various variables, not just the jobs, and including things that are more directly reflective of inflation. And they think the jobs number means those numbers are going to be bad anyway.
Right.
I thought the Filer faster thesis was largely about media cycles, was not a principle of macroeconomics. And I don't have Bruce Filer right here. That would be great, wouldn't it, if I did? But I don't. I've had lunch with Bruce several times, and the topic has never turned to macroeconomics.
Well,
I don't think that's his thing.
I'm expanding his thesis. B, I'm basing this on an article by David Dayen, a man of the left who I respect, in the American Prospect, where he worries that the Fed is going to over-tighten because it doesn't realize how quickly the market has gotten the message. He says it's in internet speed. Mm-hmm. So he is applying the faster principle to the economy. He's not an economist, but he's a very smart man. And so I thought that there was an interesting bit of speculation there that maybe things move fast in the media sphere. The business is connected and wired as never before. Things move faster in the economic sphere as well. They trade at much faster speeds. They make decisions faster, et cetera, et cetera. These Fed signals might ripple through the economy faster than we thought. Now, if recession is a self-fulfilling prophecy, as Diane worries, it's not showing up in the current jobs figures, which were very strong. So that's the problem. But I do think, in general, the Republicans are, measuring the drapes, et cetera, in the Congress, and that's insane. Because it's all based on inflation. Now, inflation gives us a ticket to, ticket to the majority, and if inflation abates, people will look ahead and see that it's diminishing. They're not, even if it's 6%.
I will see, but November's pretty close. And it doesn't have much time. It better hurry if it's going to really significantly abate. Now, but was this week a week? I mean, where things are particularly falling apart? I mean, it's weird that I guess I've gotten so accustomed to things that, like the July 4th shooting just seems like, well, that's this week's gun disaster.
We seem to have accepted all these shootings. The July 4th shooting was a bad one.
But I want to say something about the July 4th shooting.
Okay. And there have been a whole bunch of think pieces, if you read Real Clear Politics, about, the country is falling apart. This is emotionally draining time to live, et cetera, et cetera. And we do have a war in Ukraine, and it doesn't seem to be going all that well for our side. We have, always various rumblings from China. And so I think, people are sort of taking stock and thinking, and we have a weak president who doesn't seem to be in control of the situation. So I think it hit a lot of people, at least in the pundit world this week. Maybe it's a slow week. They had nothing to do but big think thumbsuckers, as we call them. But I got a lot of that pessimism. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe that my personal life is in turmoil because.
Would you like to talk about that?
I would like to talk about it. But I think I want to talk about it in the Parrot Room.
Okay, we can say
it involves intimate automotive secrets.
Ooh. Does it involve a Z?
There is always a Z, Bob.
Yeah, maybe you could sell your Z to Russia or something. They're big on Z vehicles, Z branded vehicles. So let's get back. So I want to say this one thing quickly about the shooting. Did you hear the tape of the shooting, the actual shots from July 4th?
No.
I mean, it's like he reels off, it sounds like about 35 shots, between 30 and 40 shots. And I mean, they're just like that. And the first thing you notice is these guns are effectively machine guns. I mean, I don't know if you had a bump stock or if you just need a reasonably fast trigger finger, but this is in effect a machine gun. Okay. So
you're saying it's in effect automatic.
In effect, it's not an automatic weapon because he doesn't just keep his finger held down and they keep, the shots keep ringing. But I'm saying in terms of velocity, and I'm sure a true machine gun is even faster, but it's way more than one bullet per second. And so first of all, it's like on these Second Amendment cases, people say, even most of the hardcore pro-gun people say, well, no, I mean, they didn't mean any weapon. I mean, you don't have a right to have like a cruise missile or a bazooka or a machine gun. Well, I'm telling you, these things are, in effect, machine guns, first of all. So if you agree that the Second Amendment doesn't apply to machine guns, then it doesn't apply to these things with these high-capacity semi-automatic rifles with high-capacity magazines. Secondly, so he reels off about 35, and then he has to reload. And he reloads pretty fast, but it's still, sometimes things go wrong with reloading, especially like if you're more like in a supermarket and he was just on a rooftop, didn't feel threatened, didn't feel anybody was going to rush him. He's not going to get flustered. Sometimes things can go wrong with reloading, which is another reason I would like a strict limit on magazine size of like 8-10 bullets. But even if the reloading goes well, okay, it's still like, I don't know, 5-10 seconds or something. And then you hear another 35. Okay. And if you imagine that interval of reloading happening every 8 bullets, okay, you've got a lot fewer people dead on July 4th. And, like enough that it's, it's like, I don't know, 1, 2, maybe 3, but, and that's different. And it's just like, these are machine guns, folks. And, it's just mind blow. I continue to be outraged by that Supreme Court ruling that does not allow states to say, no, to keep people from carrying these all over the place, pretty much. But moreover, just the cowardice of the inability of Congress to even say you can't sell what is in effect a machine gun with a 40, 50, 60 bullet magazine to anybody, pretty much anybody who wants one, doesn't have a criminal record. It's just amazing. It's just amazing.
I'm weak on guns, so I'm basically for all sorts of gun regulation. So I'm mainly playing devil's advocate. First, Japan has one of the strictest gun controls in the world, and their ex-prime minister just got assassinated with a homemade gun. So
how many other people were killed in Japan this year?
I don't know. Guns. Not very many, probably.
Yeah, pretty much zero.
And I'm just saying. Second, Coulter has a column this week where she claims that the militia clause actually has an enhancing effect on the Second Amendment, because you want a ready militia, an armed militia, so if the military has the gun, the public should have the gun. So that would imply that they get M16s, which are automatic, which is what the military uses. The AR-15 is not automatic.
So that's what she's advocating?
That's what she says the Constitution
would allow. They were thinking about M16s. The founders were thinking about M16s.
They were thinking of whatever the Army had.
Well, then they get nuclear bombs, Mickey. They get cruise missiles.
An infantry person doesn't have a nuclear bomb.
An infantry person has an shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons. Let's pass them out. This is the kind of stupid shit we're wasting our time on.
Well, unfortunately, the stupid shit is in the Constitution.
No, that's not. That's not. That's a stupid take on the Constitution by people who say stupid shit.
Okay. The other comment I had was from Popat, who's not a particular. I mean, I've met him; he's a nice guy, but he's an anti-Trump sniper.
And wait, can I just interject one more point? I've read up. There has been scholarship since the Heller decision on the Second Amendment that I haven't looked into it deeply, but some kind of systematic survey of usage in that era that doesn't affirm Heller's take on what would have been meant by bearing arms by militia and so on. But anyway, I don't have the details, but my main point is,
what you say,
if you agree with Ann Coulter that everyone should be able to have a machine gun, then you should be content with the laws as they are, because they permit de facto machine guns. But if you don't agree with that, then you should have no trouble with us, basically eliminating high capacity magazines.
I don't agree with Ann Coulter on that. So I'm with you on the magazines, although I do think you can come up with situations where you need more than 8 bullets, as you know. So you can have 2 guns, as you say. I had a point about Boris.
Is that the point you were going to make that I interrupted?
No, the Popat point was you think you're getting conservative points by saying why isn't the Supreme Court allowing the states, decentralized, federalist, conservative, to regulate guns? Well, nobody has a right to take away the rights, so it's a very cheap point because states don't have a right to take away the rights. If they're rights, a conservative in the court would not let states do it.
Actually, I think I understand that is now a doctrine, but my understanding is that at the time of the Constitution, the founders were only talking about the rights the federal government could and could not take away. The founders were not talking about state government.
Right, but there are now, since
and in fact, some states had state-established religions.
But since the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the Bill of Rights is applied to states.
That's explicit in the amendments?
No, it was a big decision, but it's widely accepted, like Brown versus Board of Education, that the first 8 amendments are made applicable to the states by the 14th Amendment.
But it is just a Supreme Court ruling. It is not. My point is, it is not what the founders had in mind. The founders would have been surprised to hear that New York was compelled.
But it's an amendment, Bob.
We're saying you just said it's founders. Not. You said it's a ruling.
No, it's an interpretation of the 14th Amendment.
Well,
the purpose of the amendment is to say the founders got this a little wrong. We're adding to them. Okay.
What is the fourth?
The 14th Amendment is not interpreted on the basis of what the founders thought. It's interpreted on what the basis of the people who wrote the amendment thought.
Why didn't they write what you're saying it means instead of whatever the hell they wrote?
I don't know. They're always too vague. They like to be parse and leave some lyrical and leave some room for interpretation, except in the Second Amendment, where they got very explicit and verbose.
As you know, I have never, until this particular Supreme Court got all up in arms the way so many liberals do about these conservative courts, I've always understood that Roe versus Wade was a dubiously decided decision, but this shit is when you put all these rulings together, it is a right-wing policy agenda, and it's concerning. And now there's a big, some kind of big voting, election case coming up next time. I'm not up on it, but
Heller was years ago before Trump. Heller, which is the gun case, was years ago before Trump got his majority.
Right, but these guys are the ones saying that Heller applies. They have to extend it somewhat to get to the New York ruling. Anyway,
Anyway, that was.
I'm reading the 14th Amendment, so go ahead.
Why don't you read it to us?
That's super long. I can't. It's got 5 sections.
Okay.
But I'm not seeing anything anyway.
Section 5 will come in handy later in the podcast. The Section 5 comes in handy because there's a big debate over whether you could have a national abortion law, and the diehard conservatives say there's no federal power to regulate abortion. It's like murder. It's a state and local. It's a state and local decision. The commerce power does not imply. But there's another section, which I think is Section 5 of the 14th. It's Section 5 of something that gives Congress the right to enforce rights. And if you think there are any rights involved in abortion, then that gives Congress the power to regulate abortion.
Section 5 just says that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation
the
provisions of this article.
Right. So if the abortion right was always under the 14th Amendment. So that if you see any right, privacy right for the woman who's having an abortion, it seems to me you have a very good case under Section 5 that Congress can act to enforce that right. Now, there's a big ambiguity in the Dobbs decision. Does he really admit that there's a right that's being balanced here against the right of the fetus? Or does somehow when the fetus comes along, does it vaporize whatever privacy right the woman has? But the point is that they can take it to the court, and so Congress isn't completely out of line in trying to pass a bill that codifies Roe.
Okay.
I've always thought it's crazy to think it's going to get bottled up in the states. I would rather that it get bottled up in the states, but I think it's I think it will inevitably be national.
So what, quickly on the Abe thing, I don't know much about that. Some people are saying, does China have something to do with it? He was a big China hawk. I think it was a Navy veteran who did it. It just seems to me like it's going to turn out this is like some crazy. There were celebrations in China which they're trying to tamp down. Yeah. Well, there would be celebrations in America if Xi Jinping were killed or Boris or they were on the whim. I don't think they were dancing in the streets. Yeah. So anyway, that's that. I had a point about Boris Johnson. Yeah, it's kind of sad. I find him very entertaining. I'm going to be sorry to see him go. The best thing about Boris Johnson is an article by The Spectator. I think it's probably well known in Britain, which is that he didn't attend some important cabinet meetings because he was busy finishing his book on Shakespeare, which was going to pay for his divorce. Okay, divorce settlement. So Britain really is a different place than the United States. Wait, Trump, didn't Trump write a book on Shakespeare, or am I misremembering? No, I guess he didn't. You're right. No, he and every president acted out various plays of Shakespeare, but he was King Lear, and George H.W. Bush was whatever person tries to avenge his father. I guess that would be Hamlet. Oh God! But anyway, taxing mine. The amazing thing is you look at what Boris Johnson did. He got Brexit sort of mostly done, and he didn't do anything on the other conservative issues. Britain is as woke as ever. Immigration is at record highs. He was supposed to stop that. It's sort of, and the basic line from the nationalist populists is, he didn't do what the voters elected him to do, so he lost his base of support. If you look at the things he was bounced for, lying, Jesus, when did that become a criteria for getting rid of your chief executive? Biden lies every day. Nobody cares. I don't care. Gavin Newsom partied at a fancy French restaurant in violation of his COVID restrictions. He didn't get defenestrated from office the way Johnson did. And the other thing he did was he appointed somebody to a position who had groped a man in a club when he was drunk. Okay. A sexual. Well, he didn't just do that. He lied about it and said he didn't know the guy had done that. And then that was found out. Yeah, this is a standard lie that every American politician does, which is you lie about the things that are unknown, and then if you're caught out, you're caught out. Nobody cares anymore. A couple of things. That second kind of lie is in the realm of Me Too, so I think it would have impact in American politics right now, especially if it was a Democrat. That's a good point. And the as for the other thing, one of our the commenters in the Parrot Room informed us. Last week we read the comment. I think it was Catherine Maddox that in Britain the restrictions were really strict and people were really chafing, much stricter than America, and people were really chafing under them, and so it was more meaningful when these guys violated them, and that wasn't just a lie. They did lie about it. That was part of the problem, but the very thought that they were having all these parties at 10 Downing, and so I'm not sure. I agree that it's kind of ironic if there's a tighter lying standard in British politics, because in some ways, like in British journalism is notoriously loose with the facts, which, by the way, brings us to the fact that in a way this is perfect symmetry. Boris Johnson got launched as a figure in Britain through dishonest journalism. He would write about European Union regulations in ways that maybe were, strictly speaking, not untrue, but he would take things out of context. So he would make these regulations sound much more ludicrous than they were. So he had this very fast, loose, I would say dishonest form of journalism that helped catapult him into their consciousness. He got into politics and so on. And now it's dishonesty that brought him down. And that's life. He's had a good run. He may be back.
I think the problem is that the difference is that a parliamentary system versus our system. In a parliamentary system, it's much easier to get rid of the leader than it is to get rid of a president. But if he had a base of support because he was doing things that the public really cared about, he would have survived.
On that point, easier or harder? In this case, there was a curious thing that it was all normative, the pressure that led him to resign, because, which he hasn't quite done yet, actually. He's just said he's going to resign, but he's going to eventually step down. But, it was just people resigning and saying, I'm resigning too. I'm resigning too. When are you going to resign, Boris? There was no compulsion constitutionally or through statute that he respond by resigning. He could have just locked himself in his room and said, bring it on. And I don't know when the next opportunity to kind of compel his resignation would have been.
No, I think there was a no confidence vote slated for a couple, very soon.
Well, that would have been it then. I guess he would have eventually fallen to that. Yeah,
and it's all custom. It's not rule. It's not rules.
There's no constitution.
At some point, the Queen is activated. I don't know. There was talk of activating the Queen. I don't know what she would do.
Now, my question for you is this at all? Does this reflect to any extent his fortunes? I mean, disenchantment with Brexit.
I haven't been able to figure that out. Some of the people who might take his place are probably softer on Brexit. Some of them are softer on Ukraine. He was very hard on Ukraine. Some of them are very hard on Ukraine, like the defense minister, who's the front runner to replace him. So the answer is I don't know. I think there's a lot of.
She's a hawk. She's a hawk on Ukraine. She's hard on Russia.
It's a he.
Oh, I was thinking of the foreign minister, Liz.
You're
whatever.
Thinking of Liz Truss. No, I'm thinking of the defense minister.
What's his take on Ukraine?
I think he's a harder line than a defense than Liz Truss. I think he's the hardest.
That's not easy to do, but
I think he's the hardest. Anyway, the answer is I don't know, but I think I haven't detected in the journalism that dissatisfaction with Brexit was behind it. I've detected that even people who are dissatisfied with the Brexit are now resigned to it and let's get on with it, and enough of the debate. But I don't detect a major movement to ditch Brexit and get back with the EU.
No,
especially as you know the vaccine situation worked to Britain's advantage.
I guess, but I would say a couple of things. First of all, my understanding is the British economy is doing worse than the big EU nations' economies right now. Secondly,
it's inflating faster. I don't know if it's doing worse.
Yeah, I don't know the details. It's just what I've heard. But the other thing is
9.1% inflation.
Okay, so bad. And that's what you would expect when you drop out of a trade union and have to pay higher tariffs. The other thing is that among the kind of thresholds in the building of pressure against Boris Johnson was an election not that long ago, I guess, at the local level where the Conservative Party did very badly. And the members of Parliament, wasn't a parliamentary election, but the Conservatives started worrying that Boris Johnson was a drag on them. And this was an election that's like, municipal, I don't know, like, public works officer and so on. And I don't know, if you see disenchantment with the Conservative Party in elections at that level, it seems to me it's more likely to reflect feelings about like the economy and or Brexit than it is about the personal conduct of the prime minister. But who knows? It's pretty speculative.
I'm not sure about that, but I think he did something that provoked the inflation. I forget what it was. Did he cut taxes?
Well, getting out of Brexit does provoke inflation, but I mean, getting out of the EU, Brexit does provoke inflation, but
anyway, there was I was reading something and I thought, so that's why Britain is worse than inflation is even worse than ours, because he made it worse through that. But I forget what it was. Presumably he was either spending or lowering taxes. There's a big reconciliation bill that's coming down the pike, Bob. I'm sure you're excited by that.
Oh God, can we talk about Ukraine first, and then build to a stunning crescendo about reconciliation?
Okay.
I mean, unless you have like a quick point.
I always have a quick point, so let's do Ukraine first.
I mean, I don't have a ton to say about Ukraine. Also, I'm glancing at the 14th Amendment. The reading doesn't seem, I will say, I have to admit that the interpretation the courts reached doesn't seem crazy and outlandish. I do wonder why. I mean, it says that the state shouldn't abridge the privileges of citizens. Why didn't they just say rights? Rights is the very word they had used in the Bill of Rights.
Well,
so why didn't they just say rights if that's what they meant? It says privileges and immunities.
But that's not the clause that imported the Bill of Rights and applied it to states. I think
it's
it was
not. What is it? One. Equal protection?
I think it was. No state shall deprive anybody of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's in there somewhere. It might be in the.
Well,
13th.
It does say that, but I don't see how that speaks more directly to the issue.
Well, that's it. It's a right. It says rights, doesn't it? Life, liberty, life, liberty.
No, it does, wait. What does it say? It says
the rights. I guess liberties. Liberty.
No, it doesn't
means
say
rights.
Rights. That's my point.
It says liberty. Liberty is language that invokes the rights. That's where they sluiced in the Bill of Rights. The privileges and immunities clause is, I think, it's not completely clear what it means. Justice Thomas, in the course of pissing on all these privacy rights, like abortion, but also gay marriage, gay sex, contraception, he said, well, the privacy right isn't anywhere in the Constitution, so it's bullshit, and we should knock out all these cases, but you might be able to bring it back under the privileges and immunities clause. So there's going to be litigation about privileges and immunities. It's just he raised some problems with the clause, and it's not at all clear it's that expansive.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and do your thing? I mean, if we run out of time, I'll do Ukraine in the Parrot Room.
Well, they're bringing back the reconciliation bill, Build Back Better. It's going to build back littler. It's going to be much cheaper. It's going to have $1 billion of taxes, half of which is going to go to deficit reduction. So the Democrats only have $1 trillion in taxes. They only have $500 billion to throw around to spend. $300 billion of it is going to be on climate change provisions. So I think this means it's going to be hard for them to piss off Mickey by including a child tax credit. But I'm not sure. There are still people who are saying they have to include the child tax credit in order to show Republicans have to accept it in order to show that they're really pro-life. They're really pro-motherhood, even though they're pro-anti-abortion. So, but they're going to have all these new babies in the world. They better give them a child tax credit. I don't think that's going to happen, but it is mentioned in the stories. I'll only believe it's not going to happen if it's not mentioned at all. They're all saying, well, it doesn't look like there's room for the child tax credit. So that's probably true, but I can still be paranoid. It's going to have a bunch of climate change, carbon reduction rewards. It's going to have allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, which, I am the sort of asshole who points out that that's problematic because, as Michael Kinsley noted it in a little red article in Slate, but it's the conventional wisdom. If marginal costs for a product keep going down, you don't really know where to price it. So if you let the federal government negotiate with the drug companies, they could, in theory, have the power to bid the cost so low that it doesn't let the drug companies invent as many new drugs as we want. So it's not a complete slam dunk policy gimme, but they're going to do it. And then that we think is going to soak up most of the $500 billion they have to spend. There also is this thing that they have to do, but it's not really included in the things that they've already agreed on, which is stop Obamacare rates from rising by continuing the subsidy that they passed a few years ago. And they only have till August, because by August, the insurance companies will have the increases locked in and they won't be able to stop them. So we'll have an increase that hits right before the election, which will be really bad for Democrats. So they desperately want to do that, but that's not in there yet. And the other thing is, it's pissed off Mitch McConnell, and McConnell has said, well, I'm not going to pass this bipartisan USA Competes Act if you're going to go through this reconciliation bill. And a bunch of Democrats are saying, well, fine, so he kills this.
What is the USA Competes Act? It's
a bunch of subsidies for semiconductors. It's basically directed against China, and it's it hasn't really been.
By the way,
they haven't negotiated. They haven't figured out what the trade and the labor provisions are in it yet.
Yeah.
So that means it's a long way from reaching a compromise. But the Democrats could just they could just pass the Senate bill, which is already passed through the House, and it'd be done. So they have that option.
By the way, the first version of that from our era didn't work. What was it called? Semantech or something? Remember the government semiconductor subsidy cooperative thing?
Right.
I think
I vaguely remember something like that.
Mm.
I think there's a certain amount of industrial policy involved.
Oh,
yeah.
Which we've never been as good at as, say, Japan.
Yeah. So that's the complicated array, and it looks like McConnell's bluff is about to be called, but because the House could just pass the Senate bill, but I'm not sure. He doesn't make a threat usually unless he's pretty much gamed it out that he has the leverage.
So I lapsed during the very first thing you said. I had thought Build Back Better was dead. I was wrong.
You're wrong. The parts that the Build Back Better bill it had a big child care provision. It had this huge tax credit.
I know somebody who's pointed that out.
It had a bunch of preschool expansion. It had like 4 big things, and they're all gone. So
it's a little surprising.
In theory, they're all gone. I think they could still come back. But
does this supposedly pay for itself? Because I would be surprised if amid inflation you had a big deficit spending package.
Yes, not only it supposedly pays for itself, it supposedly contributes $500 billion to reducing the deficit.
Oh, so it pays for itself up front, though? Because normally what they do is they say, well, the taxes will show up in like 50 years.
I don't know about that, but...
Well, that's kind of important when you're in the middle of inflation.
Correct. But it basically, in theory, has a bunch of tax increases on the rich that Manchin doesn't mind, and Manchin is a big deficit hawk, and he doesn't want to increase the deficit in times of inflation. So in theory, it will lower the deficit. And keep in mind, it has to get a CBO score.
As you've pointed out.
So the CBO, at least that's some check on funny business.
As you pointed out, he's another Democrat who could beat Trump. He's not my choice, but he probably could. Right?
He might be one of the few, but his problem is getting the left wing of his party, which has vilified him, to go along.
That would be hard. The nomination would be tough.
Here's a crazy idea. He could become a Republican and run against Trump.
I can imagine worse outcomes. I mean,
he's always threatened. They're always talk about that he might become a Republican. But I mean, he doesn't stoke those fears, but they're stoked for him. Clearly Liz Cheney's going to run against Trump. What does she have to lose?
Yeah.
She's raised $10 million. She's going to lose her congressional seat. Then she's going to have all this money. Why not run for president?
She'd probably have better luck changing her party affiliation than running for the nomination. I mean, she's the darling of Democrats right now.
That's another crazy idea. She won the JFK, the Kennedy Institute or the Kennedy, whatever it is, Profile and Courage Award. So she's been anointed by the Kennedys and anointed by the Reagan Library. So he has the two twin poles of aging boomer politics on her side.
She's a shoo-in. I've got a feeling if she did run for the Democratic nomination, her policy history would receive closer scrutiny by Democrats than it's received over the last month.
But the Democrats are hawks now. They're all for war in Ukraine.
Well, yeah, but there's also her domestic. I don't know what her domestic policy record is.
There is the war in Iraq.
There is that.
But then we'd have to put David Remnick in the dock too, so can't do that.
Are you against that? I thought you were.
I'm for it. I'm for putting everybody in the dock.
So what else? So Ukraine. By the way, one more point on July 4th. Bill Scher said something interesting, which is that, I've been kind of down on the gun legislation that did pass because it doesn't do any of the things that I emphasize. Bill Scher says that, the red flag provision of that this July 4th shooting is actually exactly the kind of thing that in theory, the new gun law, if strictly enforced, could have prevented. I
didn't understand that. It seems to me it reflected an inherent weakness in red flag laws, which is his parents were going to report him. So you're relying on the cops to say this guy's crazy and we're raising a red flag. And, 9 times out of 10, the cops aren't going to do that. So how does this close that loophole?
Oh, that reminds me of I don't know, but that reminds me of my genius idea of how to do a jujitsu move on the Supreme Court's New York gun ruling, which is, the one thing you still can do, you can say you have to have a license to carry a gun, but, then pretty much anyone has to pass whatever test you set up. It has to be, unless you have a criminal record, unless you beat your wife. And you can have a gun safety training requirement. And what you could do is use that. Now, this might get creepy and raise civil liberties issues, but if the state administered all of these training things and used it to evaluate, right? Like keep an eye on these people who want these licenses and ask them a few questions and see if they're crazy and maybe invoke the red flag thing or something. So
New York has now passed a law which imposes all sorts of onerous, allegedly neutral requirements to getting a gun. So yes, they must issue the gun, but first you have to take 16 hours or something of gun safety training.
You mean getting a gun or bearing one in public?
I think getting a permit to carry one.
Carry one. I mean, I had heard that they're also allowed to define these special areas where nobody can carry a gun, like on election day, the polling place, right?
But they've already done 3/4 of what you were thinking of. They haven't hooked it in with the red flag law yet.
I heard
that's an interesting possibility.
I heard that they had somewhat ambitiously defined all of Times Square as one of these special zones and said you can't have a gun in Times Square.
No, I think there is also an elaborate gun safety training requirement.
Good. Then now all that remains is to install the secret brain scanners in those that I'm recommending in these gun safety facilities.
I'm sure China will be happy to provide them.
So let's see. Are we almost out of time? Yeah, we're getting there.
There was a study from Harvard, prestigious place, saying the pandemic checks, which were one-time checks, but there were like 2 or 3 of them, and they tested it out versus people who got no checks versus people who got 500 versus 2,000, had no effect on long-term material well-being, and it was the bank account balance, and it had a negative effect on how happy people were.
Wait, what was the first variable? What didn't
were they better off in the long term economically?
If what?
If they got the $2,000 check or if they didn't.
Oh.
They spent the checks and then they were back to square one.
So it had no discernible impact?
No discernible impact. It had a negative psychological impact. And they were trying to figure out, it made people less happy. And so there were all sorts of ways you could try to, and they weren't very convincing on their explanation for why people are less happy is people got all this money and then they realized it still wasn't enough, so they were unhappy. I don't think that doesn't quite ring a bell to me. maybe it does to you, but it could be that they weren't happy that the checks stopped. I guess that's the same thing. It takes something away from people. They get not happy, or they got accustomed to a higher standard of living and then had to go back to their old standard of living, or they felt, or the right-wing version is they felt guilty getting these unearned benefits. They have a work ethic, and so they felt like they were somehow soiled by them. There are all sorts of explanations, and it didn't really answer that. So, but it wasn't a big boost to the universal basic income people, because it's or to the fashionable democratic reaction of throw money, just send people checks. We're good at sending checks. Let's just send them checks. Well, it didn't seem to really have a lot of positive impact.
So, should we about call it a day? We're over the 50-minute mark.
Sure. In general, I think these should be shorter just because I have less to talk
very
about.
Little cerebral capacity.
No, I have doing a 1 hour podcast a week
at our age. That's crazy.
And then 2 hours of Parrot Room,
which is what we've been doing.
Is too much.
We're the hardest working men in show business, Mickey.
Exactly.
And,
now that
and we're too old to be the hardest working men.
Now that James Brown is dead. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But we do have things to talk about in the Parrot Room.
Yeah. Well, I will talk about Ukraine. I'll do a little Ukraine update. You're right. It's not looking great for us. But some people see signs of hope. Get into all that. I want to talk about your man, Blake Masters.
That was on my list too.
Secret Nazi past. No, that's not true. But what is true is they're trying to frame him that way.
I think of it. It redounds more negatively on Jonathan Greenblatt, the hair trigger
head of the Anti-Defamation League.
Anti-Semitism.
The Times report. He wasn't good enough for the Times reporter. The guy also called up Abe Foxman, the past ADL president. He was looking for the quotes.
We're about to actually deal with the subject in the course.
No, we don't want to do that. We want to decide. We're undecided whether Blake Masters is a Nazi monster, and the answer will be in the Parrot Room.
We've decided. The question is
that he is a. You think he is a Nazi monster?
How big a monster is Jonathan Greenblatt and Jonathan Weissman?
Jonathan Weissman wrote the Times piece.
Yes.
Okay.
He's a famous, excitable person. He's also the same guy who did the egregious error that he said Trump called immigrants animals when he was clearly talking about MS-13 members. I don't know why the Times still employs him. Anyway, okay. We can elaborate on that.
I'm looking forward to your further commentary on Jonathan Weissman. Only in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room. So I'm going to talk about Ukraine. Good career news for two TNR alums. I want to talk about that.
David Shipley and who else?
James Bennett.
What happened to James Bennett?
He's writing the very venerable Lexington column for The Economist.
Oh.
And there aren't many venerable columns left, because TNR ill-advisedly ditched the TRB column years ago.
I think we've now dealt with that issue. We haven't said what job Shipley is getting.
No, we haven't. We won't tell them. Plus, who knows? Maybe we have dirt on these guys. We knew them back when, right?
I have a beef with James Bennett, actually. So
there we go. I was right.
Well, I have a beef with everybody.
Better. This is getting better.
I'm going to do a suicide mission and attack an article written by the beloved Mark Leibovich, who is a great guy and a great reporter and a great writer. But his latest piece, I didn't like. So we could talk about that.
Let him have it. I also want to talk about January 6th stuff. I watched another episode in that. I haven't binge watched it, but I'm watching it serially. I watched another episode, and plus stuff has happened. There have been developments. Oh God, Wimbledon.
I don't quite know what's happening with the pandemic. Seems like everybody's forgotten about it. And I don't know if that means we should be alarmed or unalarmed.
I'm hearing a little more awareness of the fact that it ain't over, and the latest strain is, in terms of contagion, is pretty resistant to the vaccine. Although in terms of preventing serious illness, the vaccine seems, I guess, pretty effective against it. But I'll write that down. We can talk about that. Pandemic. Who doesn't love a good round?
No,
yeah.
I don't have a grasp of it. So if you could help me, that'd be great.
We came to the right place. I'm married to a leading pandemic authority.
There's I wanted to talk a little about my favorite topic, corporatism, because I realized.
Are you going to get into the body metaphor?
Well, that is the definition of corporatism, but
are you going to point that out?
I'm going to point that out, but my basic thesis is corporatism.
Make them pay for when you got something this sexy, Mickey. Okay. You put it behind the paywall. Okay.
Speaking of sexy, there are articles. There's a groundswell of support for naming the names of the men in the Epstein case that I am gratified to see has materialized.
Heretofore, you had been the only groundswell for that.
No, but
it's growing.
But anyway, it's
okay.
Good. And there's and
Richard Dawkins is joining Bari Weiss University. I the connection there is that somebody in response, I think, posted some picture of him on Epstein's jet or something.
There's some Bari Weiss gossip.
Oh, good.
She's in the gossip columns, and you don't know why, do you?
I'm just hoping it, reflects favorably on
her. It does in a way that doesn't. So there you go. Let me leave it oracular like that. I
cannot imagine anyone listening to this who is not going to put down the $5 a month at patreon.com/Parrot Room. I mean, this is like.
There was a very good video about Minions and TikTok. The movie Minions and TikTok.
Oh, that reminds me. I saw a movie called Memoria, which I guarantee you very few people can say. It won this big award at Cannes, but it's hard to see. Got to get up pretty early in the morning. It ain't streaming, folks. Got to go to your local art house. And
they show it early in the morning? I doubt that.
They don't show it early. That was a kind of an idiom. I was using an idiom.
Okay. I want you to explain to me why Joe Cirincione quit the Quincy Institute.
Oh, yeah. I want to get into that. I'm a little bit unhappy with Joe and how performatively he did that. And I know him pretty well. So it pains me to say what I just said, but I have to say it, and I will elaborate in the Parrot Room.
They're also in the Parrot Room, I can raise a topic which everybody seems incredibly scared to raise, I assume because it's bullshit, which is critiques of the story about the 10-year-old rape victim who had to go from Indiana to Ohio, or was it Ohio to Indiana to get it? I think it was Indiana to Ohio.
Oh, I heard something
to get
about
an abortion.
Okay. I think we have a lot of stuff to talk about in the Parrot Room, Mickey.
I could talk about corporatism for the straight 2 hours. And I hope it won't be 2 hours. A crisp hour and a half is all I ask.
That's all we need. You may have to cut the corporatism part short, like possibly down to 0, but we'll see.
I can cut it down to 1 minute. I can cut it down to 30 seconds.
Fine, but we won't get to that until we've discussed Blake Monsters. Nazi monster? That's got to come
Blake
first.
Masters.
Oh, but what did I say? Blake Monsters?
Yes.
Nazi master? That too.
If you insist.
I do. So we will see you there.